Hello, I'm Fantastic. My name's Luke, and this week we're talking about unaccepting parents. It's literally 8:30 in the morning, and I've got to go somewhere in like 10 minutes, so I'm gonna make this quick. This topic is obviously a very important topic because obviously a lot of people struggle with unaccepting parents. I always struggle talking about this topic, or whenever people ask me, because I have people ask me a lot, how do I deal with people who are unsupportive or unsupportive parents and stuff like that. For me, my situation was very different in that I didn't live with my parents for the entire time that I was questioning my gender and coming out with my gender, and in some ways that was a great thing, and in some ways that was a terrible thing. I came out to my parents for the very first time when I was just 16 years old, I'm pretty sure. This is important, please. Then I came out to them again when I was 17, then I came out to them again when I was 18, when I started hormones. The process for me was a very long process, and that was because my parents didn't really see the process of me questioning my gender. They didn't really see me coming out. They saw me 4 times a year for a total of maybe about 16 weeks of the year, and during that time I basically was like, well, I've got to go and pretend to be a girl because I don't want them to get confused. I had a lot of friends in Australia, I was making steps towards my transition, I was researching steps in Australia, and if my parents had taken me out of Australia because they were scared for my well-being, or they were scared of my mental health, or worried about me wanting to transition, I knew that I would basically be trapped with nowhere to go, and I wouldn't be able to get my education, which is very important to me. So I basically just sort of had to suck it up and deal with it until I turned 18, until I started hormones. And that sort of brings me on to my next point. My parents are my biggest advocates. Since I started medically transitioning, and once I started making those steps towards it, the second my parents realized how much happier I was, they were 120% on my side. I never thought that was going to happen. Some of the things and conversations that I had to have with my parents at 16, 17 years old really affected me, and I honestly thought that there was no possible way that my parents would ever accept me. I did not think it was possible. I remember making posts after posts after posts in like Facebook groups and like the FGM groups, being like, what do I do? My parents don't accept me. I don't really know what to do, how I can make them accept me, and trying to explain the situation, desperate for someone to help, and there was nothing that anyone could do. And that's the thing. When it comes to family, there's nothing that people really can do besides your family and your relationship and how you guys work on accepting and processing what is happening together. And I can sit here and tell you it gets better and that it's all going to be fine, but I know that it's very difficult to deal with that situation at that time, and how feeling like there's no one there who can help you is really scary, particularly when you're in a situation where you are under the roof of a very unaccepting family. I luckily never have had to really properly experience that, and if I did, it was only for very short periods of time before I kind of brushed my transition under the rug. And part of that's my fault, and part of that's made it worse, but part of it also saved me from having to potentially deal with it. But at the same time, knowing where my parents are now, if I was more consistent, my parents probably would have been a lot more understanding and would have probably helped me. But because I thought, well, there's no point, I can't go on hormones until I'm 18, so there's no point me fighting for me to be transitioning, I'm in an all-girls school, it's too difficult, I'll just wait. Because I did that, it kind of made things worse. And that's why I sort of want to bring on to my next point, in that sometimes parents are unaccepting because they are afraid, and they don't know what to do, and they don't know how to help their child. And a lot of the time, they do really love you. And I'm not going to say everyone, because I know that there are some parents who are just dickheads, and there are some transphobic people who are just super transphobic. You can't justify that. And I understand that, and I'm not trying to give people excuses. But I think that it's really important to recognize that sometimes the people who are being so against your transition are just genuinely afraid. My mum was afraid for me. She was afraid because she'd read these statistics that 41% of transgender people killed themselves, and she didn't want me to be transgender because she didn't want me to be part of that statistic, not realizing that that statistic was for people who were being unaccepted as transgender. And she was afraid of what that all meant and what that would mean for my life. She thought that I would never be able to succeed. She thought that no one would ever care about me. She didn't realize I could just live my life, and that being transgender wouldn't really impact that, and that there are many things that gender doesn't impact, and that me being happy is more important than me feeling normal. It was very difficult for her to realize that, because obviously she was afraid. And during that time, before I was on hormones, where sometimes you don't pass as well, people would call me male or refer to me as a male, and mum would be like, oh, what do I do? And she would get angry in response, and she would get angry at me for making her be in that situation, and she would kind of put the blame on me for that, when really she was just angry because people were calling me a boy, and she would have to correct them, and that made her feel uncomfortable. And she didn't want to go and say that I was a boy because she didn't really understand. And, once I started hormones, the second I started hormones and the second I started noticing changes, it was like that. Suddenly she was using the right pronouns. It took me getting to that point where I was obviously showing that I was much happier, and that's what medical transition did for me. The second I started T, nothing could bring me down. I felt like, finally, after all this time, I have some control in my life, and everyone around me recognized that. Even the people who were initially against my transition, or I'm not even going to say initially against my transition. My parents were never against my transition, they just were never really supportive of it because they didn't want me to suffer. I understand that. I've never been a parent. I don't know what it's like to have a kid, and I don't know what it's like to have a kid and watch them suffer as much as my parents were watching me suffer, even though they didn't even realize what the hell was going on. And I don't carry blame for them, There are two ways you can handle situations like that. You can hold on to the blame, and you can never really forgive someone. And look, I'm not bashing people who do that because obviously everyone heals differently, and that's important. For me, it was easier and much more in tune with who I am as a person and who I want to be as a person. I forgive everything. All of the things that were said, all of the things that were done, because I look now and I see how far my mom has come and how far my dad has come in the 2 years since I started medically transitioning, and it's amazing. And I did not know it was going to happen. I remember thinking at 16, I don't even know if they're going to love me because I'm going to have to turn my back on every single person in my life to do this. And I'm willing to do it because that's more important to me. And I remember feeling so guilty about it, like, I can't believe I'm giving up my family for this, but I wasn't giving up anything. I was sticking to my truth, and if people don't follow me, that's not my problem. And I think that's the best thing that you can take away from what I'm saying. I'm not telling you what to do, because I don't think that's appropriate. I don't know what family situation you're in. I don't want people to get into a situation where they're kicked out. I don't want to get people into a situation where, oh, well, Luke did this, so therefore this is the best thing to do. Because for every single person, it is different. And that's why these conversations are so difficult. But I hope that what you take away from my story is that if you give it time, sometimes the things that you never expect to happen will. And I'm so proud of my family. I'm so proud that my parents, and my mom in particular, are such advocates for the transgender community. I never thought that I would ever have that. I never thought that I'd have that. I thought that when I transitioned, I was going to lose them. They just turned around and showed just how much love and support your family can have for you. And I'm not saying that every family's like this, because I know that there are lots of people who don't have that. Just know that it's possible to go from one extreme to the other, where you feel genuinely afraid of your family and you feel afraid of being yourself, to feeling so supported and loved, because I didn't know that was possible. And you don't hear stories like that enough. You always hear either the parents who are totally accepting right off the bat, and then there are the people who are kicked out of their home. No one really talks about the in-between, where there are parents who are pretty unaccepting. Like, I would say my parents were quite unaccepting, but now they're very accepting of me. And it took them time. It did take them time. And I know that for someone who is in this position that I was in like 3 or 4 years ago, time doesn't feel enough, because time isn't helping now, is it? I guess just hold on and research, include your family in that, try and talk to them. I'm very closed off. I didn't tell my parents very much about medical transition anyway, and a lot of that was just fear, because they knew I wanted to start hormones, they knew I wanted to have top surgery, but they were freaking afraid because they had no idea what it was about, and they didn't want to research it because they didn't want to actively show that they were supporting any of this. But if I'd, told them, oh, well, this is what this would do, this is what this would do, and was more open about it, they'd probably be a little bit less scared about it. So maybe try that as well. Anyway, I've got to go. My cat is eating my sock. I will see you guys next week. Bye.